Welcome back, everyone. So today is going to be a pretty damn fun one, essentially a post-mortem on the initial publication of our first video game. And as you can see from these collapsed titles, much is great. Some things went wrong in a quite unexpected way that's very unfortunate, but we should have resolved soon. I'm going to share with you current sales figures, actual data from Steam, so you can see how Steam works. We can talk about, well, does Valve justify that 30% that a lot of people complain about, and then what we're going to do to respond to things. So if you want that look into just what it's like in indie games, this is the video for you. And both this very video that you're doing right now and also the Pale Beyond itself have been made with the help of today's sponsor, Notion, the app that I run my 16-person business and personal life on. It is the everything tool for notes, planning, project management, studying, education, reading, literally anything. It's simple enough to be used as a standard note-taking app, but powerful enough and customizable enough to do super powerful integrations, amazingly handy templates. Really, if your business or your life has a need, Notion can solve it. It runs this YouTube channel, our Warcraft channel, our game studio, our games publisher even uses and loves Notion, allowing us to seamlessly collab. It truly is the forefront of modern productivity, and best of all, it is completely free for personal use. Use my link to let them know I sent you. I happily pay, of course, for their business plan for our whole team, and it's some of the best money I've ever spent. Today's story is just another example of it. So last-minute optimizations caused a bunch of bugs with our game, The Pale Beyond, which was super unfortunate. You'll learn more about that today, but know that we handled all of it in Notion. Here's our post-launch bug board. Thankfully, it's now getting a lot smaller, but it's a Notion database. You can see they're super customizable. You can see the properties like class, status, patch that the bug is fixed in, and team assignments for people. But it's not just a simple table. No, every entry is also its own page. So if I click on a bug, you can actually see all of our shared notes on that bug so that everybody, our publisher included, knows what's up. There's no more hunting for Google Docs, slacking people and waiting for a notification or anything like that. Notion is literally like having your own tailor-made application to just do exactly what you need. Centralizing your knowledge, making your team more efficient, making our company a better place to work. It really is the best, and you can get started free with Notion Personal today using that link in the description to let them know I sent you. A massive thanks to Notion for sponsoring today's video. I could not think of a more natural sponsorship because we run everything using Notion. So let's expand this Notion toggle into the initial good news, which is that even though we do have some unfortunate things that have popped up that we do have to talk about, much is actually quite great. So in terms of the writing, the music, the art, the pacing, the actual overall narrative experience, the thing that we intended to really get out there, when unfortunate bugs do not, end up damaging that, the actual core piece of art that the team made is really hitting the mark. People are being driven to tears. I say driven to as if it's a bad thing, but people are really finding a fantastic emotional experience there. A lot of people are super ecstatic about it. In terms of its day one sales performance, it thundered past our publisher benchmarks, which was pretty damn fascinating too.
Yeah, I think everything went, especially because you're obviously the first game, you're going to expect some hiccups at every part of the process, and there have been hiccups at every single part of the process so far. The fact that there's still people actually really enjoying it, it's ultimately what we're kind of here for. Obviously, you want to make a product that also makes money, otherwise you fail as a business, but fundamentally the idea was, especially in like early ideation, is what story can we tell? What thing can we make players feel? And that has, for the most part, absolutely landed. Honestly, harder than I think some of us expected. Yeah, it's surprising to see people really feel it this hard. We launched to a 97, which I was super thrilled about. We had, so that was a 97 in Steam. Our Metacritic, once 3 reviews were added to the initial one, was sitting at 82. There's 2 other reviews that are 90s. If they were to get added to Metacritic, that would be quite nice because we did get a bunch of 9 out of 10s. OpenCritic also looking good with an OpenCritic score of 80% and 100% critic recommendations, which is really all fantastic. Now,
there's going to be a fun bit of texture to that in a minute. So we're very, very happy at the core game itself. But before we share exact sales figures, talk about how big Steam is and all of that, I think we have to talk about the things that went wrong. And that is where I think this is one of the most useful, diagrams ever. It is that of survivorship bias. And just in this case, instead of, I suppose, German flat cannons, it is the QA process. And one mistake that you'd only really be like, oh, you catch it in hindsight and then feel really stupid for making it. That's ultimately what ended up being the problem. So just to get you caught up with this diagram to understand it, right? They, planes came home, and this is where they saw all the bullet holes, and they went, oh damn, there's bullet holes in all these bits of the planes. We better put armor on them. The extra armor didn't help, because it turned out these are the planes that came home, right? So because these are the planes that came home, the places where they didn't have loads of bullet holes were the places that,
made you not come home.
Made you not come home.
Yeah.
And where they did have bullet holes meant that, yeah, you had a bullet hole there and you still made it home. So it wasn't as important as somewhere else. And ultimately, that's what it's kind of ended up being like. So we right now have a host of UI bugs that are actually one issue. Okay, there's this thing that pops up. It's the manifest. I'll grab a little bit of the manifest. Yeah, see there with the resource cards. This is where you can look at your resources, your key items, your your sailors, your scouts, your specialists, all your kind of different members of your crew, right? But the problem is these are all fundamentally working off this system of resource cards. Now, to not really, I won't bore you with the details, but a performance optimization was made after most of external QA that then resulted in a bunch of visual issues with the UI. Now, it actually has transpired that the game data itself is essentially fine in most cases, or at the very least, if there's any game data stuff, that's another issue. But that's literally it. And because it's in one overarching thing that the bug's been present in, from a user-facing perspective, it has actually manifested as loads and loads and loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of different bugs.
Yeah. That's a very fun
Which
thing.
leads to the inconsistent gameplay.
Yeah, it's very fun when you think about it in that way. It's like, oh yeah, that's a bug, that's a bug, that's a bug. No, that's one bug.
Yeah, it's all downstream.
Yeah, but then obviously it's about the user impact of, oh, this game is really buggy, but it's actually yes and also no. And I think that's a part of being a customer versus being a developer. You can see people go, it's actually not as bad as you're saying, but it totally is because it's your experience. Oh,
exactly. Yeah. It's one of those things, just like how when something goes wrong, it's always good when a developer is able to say, all right, community, here's what's happened. And I would love to provide you with an actual technical breakdown. We'll get Thomas on to do that at some point. But essentially, that's the core thing. Now, there are some other unfortunate bugs that we just didn't catch between doing internal and external Q&A. Ultimately, as we'll find out, maybe 50 people QA testing a game in total. That's great. It's very different from 10,000 people or 5,000 people or, a far larger number of people, right? And that's essentially the thing that we've realized. Now, I'll talk later about how we're actually fixing all of this. And there is a lot of good news here. But ultimately then, our lesson with bugs has led to what I showed off in the sponsor integration, which is some of our bug board. So you can see lots of things completed here. There's the script-wide typos pass that, of course, Matt, you did a big Herculean effort on the night before launch.
Got another one to do too.
Yep. For different categories of things depending on how they'd be picked up by the methodology. But ultimately what we learned is methodological biases are the thing you need to safeguard against. So having a QA process that has time and people, that's great, but it's not going to be enough if your methodology has biases that give you blind spots, such as this blind spot to survivor bias. The blind spot to survivor bias is basically just a big analogy.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting callback, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Because remember what Mike Ibarra was talking about for Blizzard and how that ended up being a kind of people seeming that QA is undervalued and customer services undervalued? Things like that, understanding that there's methodological biases and you can do QA And you can do QA better and better and better every time through reps. And that's why QA is actually very, very important.
Yeah, it is.
And you learn that very quickly. And if you're thinking the right way of how important it is, you go, oh yeah, this is why you want an in-house QA department. This is why you want experts in QA. This is why you want tons of automation, tons of manual testing as well. You want to make sure people actually can cover this stuff really well, which is very funny that we've released one game and go, oh yeah, QA is super, super, super important. And there's loads of methodology, and it seems not everyone learns that after publishing games.
It's a bit weird at Blizzard scale. Like, we always knew QA was important, and that's why in the lead up to the game we did have full-time QA, which we will continue to have moving forward, to be very clear. But for us, it was just being new at it, and the methodology side. Ultimately, that is what led to some things, led to some things slipping through. I'll talk about how we'll be changing processes a little bit later in the video, because we have had a little bit of a debrief on the whole situation. But ultimately, that's our lesson with bugs. The other thing then is UX. So here's a great example, right? Here is, here's the UI. You can see the little dudes here. That's your crew. And, their color coding and stuff will tie to status effects they have, like being freezing, being frostbitten, being malnourished, having scurvy, that kind of thing. Now, when I look at this, what do I see as a standard person playing games? I see a bunch of resources.
Yep.
Now, ultimately, this is the amount of food that you've thrown into the hoosh pot that week. This is the amount of fuel that you're going to be committing this week. The actual quantity of those resources, though, is of course in your resource cards. Like as an example here, some cans of food that you can then spend to increase your food. However, from what we're used to as gamers, right, it's not exactly like that. Because I look here, I'm like 2 out of 100. Oh no, I don't, like I could only have 100 food, but I have resource cards that could give me, more than 100 food. This is confusing. Because ultimately your inventory and your stockpiles are in the resource cards, whereas the number is referring to, like, essentially your kind. It should really be called hunger rather than food, which I think that's what I'm beginning to realize, because it's all a UX thing. Essentially, I'm sure the mechanics could be better, but point here is, like, the mechanics are fine enough, but it's little tiny things in the presentation that can lead to somebody coming to the right conclusion with the information that they're given. But that's not how the game works. And that's ultimately because there were just UX oversights with how some of these things were communicated to players. You then combine that this is the system with the resource cards that had the visual UI bug, and suddenly your resource gameplay and your resource gameplay and how these work don't make sense anymore for the people who experience that bug. There have been people, plenty of people who have said, oh yeah, one or two very minor visual bugs, played through to the end, actually cried, the masterpiece god tier, I love this. But then there's people being like, look, I really like the game, I really like what you've done, but this review, for right now, it has to be a negative review because of the state of the bugs. And, there's one guy who said that. I replied to him being like, oh, yeah, dude, you're right. Thank you for this, the list of things that he had in his review, because then we were able to very quickly kind of have a huddle and work out what the crack is. So this is just this is a good example of the UX with resources.
Yeah.
And then people felt like, but if I spend 50 food in a week to, the end of the week, you basically do your ration allocation. So if I spend this amount of rations at the end of the week, that doesn't really make sense, because, I have all this food, but it's because that's not food. That's essentially, so it's a funny little thing of clarity in UX, where ultimately, if moving forward, I would like to see if we could have a far better visual representation of that. And it's only once the rubber hit the road that we realized.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good analogy to say the way it's currently represented is almost a little bit like, here's what's in your clip, but you can't see your reserves. So it gets down to 2 or 1 bullets and you go, oh, I'm out of bullets. But then reloading is this other process, having to go and fill the pots. You go, oh, I understand. There's a little bit of, oh, what is the mechanic and what is the display of the mechanic making me feel? And it might be a little bit wrong and dissonant if you feel a lot of stress because the number's low, even though the number's fine in the back end.
Yeah.
So you can immediately imagine how much that would be. Hey, say the icon's red. The icon is a little bit more of an orange, and it only goes red when your stockpile is low, and maybe you have a total maximum food in the bracket below that. A little bit extra clutter, but also a little bit of, oh no, I can see at a glance what I understand. So even in the case of you're seeing a screenshot or watching gameplay, you go, oh, I understand the situation in one small bit. And that's why every UI you see has got 40 billion numbers, because it's very hard to do that correctly without overloading UIs.
Yep, so I have thoughts about that. To move on, though, because I do want to rack it through this and actually get to the numbers, because I know a lot of you are going to want to see the juicy numbers. Load save. So I think, right, the idea was initially to have very simple, like, saves and stuff as you were playing the game initially, but then, because of narrative reasons, a certain mechanic changes. We ended up kind of incorporating it into the base, which I think, in hindsight, was an absolute mistake, because this is not how users are used to experiencing a load save system in a video game. The idea here is that each one of these notches is basically a week in your playthrough, and whenever you make like a big different choice, you can then branch. Our idea there was that we wanted a way that people could have a lot of replayability and see all of the unique decisions and unique things they could do in the game, and maybe experiment, you know, a run where this thing happens to that character. But it ended up not being intuitive, and we then had a problem where essentially these are checkpoints. These are not save points, because these are automatically at the start of, essentially they're at the start of each, you could almost say, turn. Yeah, they're snapshots at the very start of a turn. So if you mess up a turn, something goes bad, go to the previous turn, go to the previous turn. But it ended up just not being particularly clear. And also, for technical reasons, this is why there's a lot, you know, the way in a lot of video games you have to go somewhere to save. There are technical reasons for that in some games. We know some other developers who are facing the exact same issue, and that's why we ended up doing it like that. Now, we've since worked out our solution that will essentially allow for a quick save slot, which will cap most of the downsides in a way that keeps this safe. Because obviously, if you rework your save system, but then you bust a player's save, that is a horrifically bad thing to do to somebody who's put time in. So this is another great example. Even a little thing where whenever you lose the game, it'll be like, you know, basically the button of like, yes, I have lost, continue. That was too flavorful. So people didn't think, they just assumed, oh, I have to start from the beginning, like it's a roguelite, but that's too much text to go through. Whereas our design intent is, you start again from the previous week, or maybe even the previous week if you want to slightly alter your changes, because we don't want to waste our players' time.
Yeah,
but literally the flavor text means that that's not clear.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of back in the day, whenever you would, well, some of us will be playing an RPG, or maybe a VN or something with like lots of like week-based choices that you know would cascade down. And you would just go, okay, well, I'm going to use a separate save slot for every single week here, because I know if I do something wrong, especially if you're playing something like a Persona game or an SMT game or one of those more hardcore RPGs, and you go to every save slot, you know, sometimes I'm going to ruin it. So that's kind of what was actually technically implemented, with a whole series of rewind points and checkpoints. It's just the UX of it wasn't actually designed in a way that makes people feel like that, and that's like where the point is. This is actually really quite good and user friendly. It's just didn't tell anyone that.
Yeah.
And you go, of course, damn it. Such a thing to learn.
Let's move on and talk about sales figures then.
Yeah.
I'm sure this is what a lot of people want to know. Number one, the 4-hour scale of game and like genre of game, they're excellent. And in terms of percentile, we're in a great place, as in percentile of indie games on Steam. Our day one sales figures then is that's 6,089 copies. However, day one, as you can see, did start here at like 2 p.m. in whatever time zone Valve is basing things off. So within that period of time, we got the 6,000 sales up to 11,200 sales. Now you can see in terms of revenue, day one was a total Steam revenue of $109,000, 404. However, before you kind of look into these revenue figures, you have to remember multiple, there's multiple stages in the chain where that gets snipped down, right? So multiple stages in the chain where that gets snipped down by, of course, Valve, then paying our publisher recoup. To understand roughly what that is, if you were to go on the Fellow Traveler website or the Treasure Hunters fan club website, you can see the way that it basically works as per standard. Obviously, I'm not going to get into like confidential contractual details. Suffice to say, we're extremely happy with the publishing relationship. It's been a great working relationship. Nothing's been exploitative. There's been no bullshit. And we're very happy with the contract and the way that everything's working. So that is all good and thumbs up. So that's the disclaimer about revenue, right? There's also some funding from NI Screen, which is in the form of a recoupable loan. So that money will have to be gone, as well. You've got to account a few percentage for refunds. Our refunds, it's between 2 and 4%. It's like the industry standard. Overall, then, we were very happy with this launch. We're very happy with the launch revenue as well, both us and our publisher, which is really good news. We did launch to a 97%, but then the problem is, obviously, issues, right? So our Steam percentage goes, as more people see bugs, it goes from 97% to 90%. Now, look, 90% for a game that, from the user's perspective, is riddled with bugs, because this manifest issue kind of cascaded through a lot of systems, that is still something to be happy about. Sure. Obviously, though, we're treating with the utmost seriousness. I'm going to share with you our plan to fix that very, very, very soon. And don't worry, it will be prompt. There will be no big silence and then waiting. We will keep you in the loop every step of the way. So overall, then, we're extremely happy about that. And to look at this, which is some research done by Game World Observer, and there's multiple similar articles out there, but this is basically average revenue of an indie game and then a percentile, right? You can see that if you are making 9 grand, you're at like the 67th percentile. If you're making 90 grand, you're down here, maybe the 88th percentile. So our day one sales basically put us in the top 10% of indies, with, our day 3 being 11,200 sales at the price point that we have, which is for a game that's taking, most people between 7 and 11 hours for, for their first playthrough, with, I think like 20 to 25 is when people are like seeing all of the content. That is, in the world of indie pricing for a premium narrative game, that's like what it should be. That's normal. So overall, then, on this front, we're extremely happy. Like, as an indie game dev, this is a insane initial success. One part of that, though, of course, is Valve, and this question: do they earn their 30%? Now, with how Valve operate, you're actually at liberty to share information from Steam. It's not like that with all the other stores, so obviously we do have to respect that. I think it'll be no surprise to people if Steam is the vast lion's share, right? But just to show to you how big Steam is in terms of the the impressions you get. So we got, on the day after launch day, over 6.5 million impressions. That's because our game was at the top of popular upcoming. And it then started going into the discovery queues. For a few people, it ended up in the main carousel. Overall, then, our visits over time, you can see 250,000 visits. We have click-through rates and stuff that we were all very good and happy about. So all these stats, us and our publisher, very happy about them. Obviously, we know a lot of people are holding off on a purchase because of the situation with bugs. But that brings us to the question then of, does Valve earn their 30%? And there's a reason this is a very short segment, and that reason is, yes, from our perspective as an indie developer for whom 30% of the revenue goes to Valve, and then we have to pay back our recoup and all of that stuff with, the publisher and, get the money squared, we're very happy with Valve's 30%. Because the amount of exposure with the click-through rates and all of that we've got has certainly meant that while they've taken 30%, they're giving us, it's 30% of a far larger pie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it ultimately boils down to Valve earn their 30%, not by giving developers a very good experience, although it is great. They give you a good experience. They give players a great experience. They give people on the store and people on the platform a fantastic experience the whole way across the board. They always have, and they largely always will, with it improving over time. And that means, happy users are going to buy more games.
Yeah, here's a great example.
They go so hard to actually serve you a video game that you want to play.
Yeah.
That if you're making a video game that people want to play, then Steam is absolutely your best friend. every step of the way.
Even refunds are a good example.
Yep.
Customers feel like they are more protected. Therefore, they're more likely to buy a game because they know if they immediately don't like it, then that's fine. So there's actually reasons provided with refunds. 50% of the refunds that we got was just because it's not the sort of game that those players wanted. It's one of those things because we are a cold game and there are survival mechanics in the game. A bunch of people seem to have thought that it was supposed to be like Frostpunk. Now, at no point have we've said that people who like Frostpunk's like vibe and setting will like the game. We've never said it's a game that's like Frostpunk, but that spreads around. But the thing is, it's good that Valve has those users protected. That means that people feel like they can take a chance in a game and they're going to be okay. That's a really good thing for the health of the platform, and that's good for the developers on that platform.
I think that's the fun thing about looking at numbers, because you look at refunds and say, as an example, you have like a 5% refund rate, and you go, 5% of my sales are gone. This refund system's awful. You don't have a number for how many people didn't refund your game.
Exactly. And
but only bought it because they did that.
How many fewer negative reviews will you have because somebody's going to be like, well, I'm not going to leave a negative review for this game. It's clearly doing its thing, and if it's good at its thing, that's fine. Yeah. But I don't want that thing, so I'm not going to leave a negative review, but I am going to refund it.
Yeah, it's a mismatch.
That's great for the developer. Mm-hmm. So overall then, we are perfectly happy with that side of things with Valve. So then, for the continued plans, what we're actually doing to fix this is where there's really good news. So the first thing is, goal 1 is all common bugs and mechanical bugs to be fixed this week. We just had basically a quick huddle about it this morning. Once we identified that core issue with the manifest and the resource cards, that fix actually should be in today. And we've got that, and one more issue I know with the dogs. Those pretty much should be done by the time you see this video, actually. So that's good. Goal number 2 then is to implement a overhauled save system in the game and to add new difficulty options. The overhauled save system we've already essentially designed, and we're doing it in a way so that it's a very safe architecture. Yes, it will basically mean you'll have to return to the captain's cabin, which is just like 2 clicks to save the game, but at the very least we can theme that decently, and it will be fully stable and compatible with every single save, which ultimately is extremely important. And that will essentially act as, within each weekly checkpoint, you having a quick save slot. While not ideal, and maybe a more formal overhaul could happen in a few months or something like that, we feel that this is a pragmatic solution that will be able to cap a lot of the downsides that players may be concerned about. Another thing people talking about in relation to this is like, yeah, I want to replay stuff, but I don't want to, I don't want to click through all this text. Well, a good example there is we do actually have a rapid, advance to the next decision, essentially thing that you can hold. That is now implemented on keyboard and mouse, which also fell over for some bizarre tiny reason that slipped through testing because it had worked during previous testing, which I know is silly. And then as for the new difficulty options, we have discussed 2 different options. Like, one of them would be to multiply resource numbers and then do a scale. Our other one, though, which I think is what we'll go for, is perk items. You do get perk items at the start of the game anyway, depending on how much you salvage the ship. We can essentially use those to offer a second difficulty level that will be more suited for narrative game players. We found that survival game players generally find the resource mechanics to be just fine and not really an issue, and they enjoy the mixture of like the character loyalty. A good example, the game is balanced for you to scrape by, for you to actually need to use the medical tent for frostbitten people. To send people out in bad weather knowing they will get frostbite because you need the resources. But I think there is a player profile that perhaps doing too much of that to them isn't really going to work, so we do feel that an easier mode, more for that player base, is actually a pragmatic move.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting rope to walk because you want to preserve the actual the theme of the game and how it feels without having that impact. And that's where, obviously, I think people look at, I guess the whole Dark Souls should have an easy mode debate and go, everyone who actually, plays the Souls games goes, oh, it does. It's called the actual game systems.
Yeah, it's called Sword and Board.
Yeah, and it's like extending those in a way that doesn't feel as overt as you open the game and it goes, do you want to have your ass kicked, or do you want to have a,
Yeah.
or do you want to just hold down the go button?
Because right now we're finding that depending on the perks that people end up, I call them perks, like things that people salvage from the ship that give them bonuses later on. You know, those obviously have differences on difficulty in various different ways. So there's a little bit of tuning and stuff that we can do there. We believe that quite a lot of this can be achieved actually this calendar week. And we generally think that with goal 1, which is like today, Monday, so Tuesday when you see it, and goal 2, which is for this week, we think this will cap most of the glaring issues that players have faced. This will be combined with UX tweaks so that people are a bit more sure about what's actually going on. Goal 3 then is generally just as bug-free as is possible by next week. It's always very normal in games, especially indies, when you do not have a humongous budget, which we didn't, that, you know, bugs can happen. And when you're testing, even say with like 50 testers or 50, you know, in-depth test sessions overall, even with that, there will be bugs that will just slip through. And when you have, in our case, like that many thousands of people going through, more things will crop up. What has been fantastic is we've been very fast at communicating with people on the Steam forums and our Discord, and that has allowed us to basically act in I think a pretty impressive speed to some of the issues that have cropped up. So by like mid next week, we should be as bug free as is possible by then. And I bring this up as a goal because I think it's something we can achieve based on current progress. Even between Friday and Saturday, we had humongous progress. Beyond then, I do want to, this obviously is contingent on sales, but we do think that sales, especially sales right now, and we think sales velocity over time, in light of fixing these issues, should be enough that we can think about what sorts of additional content can we bring. Could we maybe add an epilogue or something like that? I think that would be nice. There's some cut content. Could we find the budget to maybe re-implement some of that? Obviously, we would like to put the game onto more platforms as well, and mechanical tweaks in response to feedback. It's the sort of thing, you know, I do think that from a financial position, we'll be healthy enough that we can spend, you know, it's not like, you know what, Pale Beyond's just going to be an 82% in Steam because of these issues. In my opinion, there is enough good in Pale Beyond that no, it should be a 95.
Yeah.
And if we can spend the additional time to make it that, then we absolutely should.
Of course.
And then as for anything else, there are things that we can't talk about. But if I click this, you'll see a picture of Sean Murray. Obviously, No Man's Sky is a game that had, you know, we don't have problems at the tier that No Man's Sky did. Those were quite foundational. But the one thing that people liked is how Hello Games, after they had basically achieved the goals that people thought that the game would have, based on the big PlayStation announcement and everything, they were just like, all right, we're just going to keep on making stuff until this is like the most, you know, No Man's Sky is the most No Man's Sky perfect version of itself it can be.
Above and beyond.
So as much as is possible, we too would like to go above and beyond as much, you know, as much as we can do, while still obviously being responsible employers to our team. I think that if we do that, though, that the thing that is also right by our customers will also be right, you know, as a business, and right by our employees, who, at the end of the day, I think made incredible art that's been very impactful in people. We obviously cannot let issues with the game as a piece of software get in the way of that. So that's why we're going to move heaven and earth to make it happen and get things right. So overall then, we do have things to be quite miffed about that are our own fault, but also we do have a lot to be very thankful for and a lot to be very happy about.
Absolutely.
The lion's share of the community reaction has been absolutely terrific. We know that we know that we've made a great game. It's just the software's not as good as the game, and that's what we've got to fix up. I think we can do that. So that's obviously, that's where it is. I'm always the person, right? I don't want to say that I'm a glass half empty person, but if I think that we should really be a 95 and I'm seeing that we're a 90 and it's because of these bugs, my worldview will not contain the 90% of good until the 5% that I don't think should be there will be gone. that's just me as a person. So for me, it's very much like a boom stage of battle cam. However, that is definitely not how the team should feel, and that is, you know, obviously that's just me personal. As a team, we're ecstatic and over the moon. So that's essentially what's up. I suppose, is there anything you want to add, Matt?
Not really. It's been really cool to see actually finally hitting the release, and it being kind of complicated in a way that you expect it to be, but it's also so underpinned by the positivity that you're like, yeah, there's problems to fix. Let's go fix them.
Yeah,
let's go fix them.
That's it. We feel full of fuel. Actually, there's one other thing that I suppose it's not an announcement, but it is something that we will be doing. So one of the things that was challenging in this development is that because of external factors, we went from 2 coders to 1 coder. That coder also happened to be my co-founder. By that stage, it's not like I could really sub in the code front because they were already knee deep in making the game. And, you know, there was times where the YouTube obviously needed to do well in order to be able to chip in and make sure things were okay. But the problem is when your coder is also your lead writer, the guy who's running the company and leading the team, you know, that is hard. So our immediate first step is hiring another programmer, so that we in future will be developing everything from the perspective of dedicated programmer, dedicated QA, working together to ship code, test code. The development methodology that I think is the only reason why the Pale Beyond has existed through these challenges is one called continuous development, as outlined by Dave Farley, by the way, if you would like to check that out, if you're a sort of project management nut, which some of us are. That makes us both lame and also very cool. But that's that. And I suppose the other thing that's been essential is, you know, it is literally Notion. Like, Notion is the software that we've done every single news doc on for years. It's also what we run the games company on.
God,
and yeah, if it wasn't, honestly, for having pretty good project management in that regard, like, we wouldn't have had a snowball's chance in hell. But now as it stands, I feel like we have to do a little bit of consolidation, but we have proved that we can do a thing that's excellent, that is more than the sum of its parts. And at the very least, if we had, say, a bit more time and budget and a bit more in the QA and had a few lessons in the QA, the only issues that happened wouldn't have happened.
Indeed.
So ultimately, lessons learned. Hopefully some data shared with you, a little bit of how Steam works, a little bit of the scale of Steam, the honestly sometimes kind of depressing numbers that do underpin the independent games, you know, sort of segment of the industry.
That's crazy.
And some
10%.
real world numbers, because hey, if I can take a screenshot of the Steam backend and show it to you, and Valve allow that, which they're happy with, then why the hell not? I think it's bloody interesting.
Sure is.
So that's it for today. Thanks to today's sponsor, Notion. Thanks to you for all your support thus far. And honestly, with the support of our bug board on Notion, and Notion is a project management tool, I think by by this day next week, the Pale Beyond will be in a radically better state. So, thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.